Close my email. Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Great. Now that the temps aren't in the 90s now.
I'm sorry, in the 90s, no doubt. Let me. Nate, I just talked with our friend Julia. They're nice people, I'll tell you what.
Yep. They're ready to go.
All right. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Let's do this. Okay. Thanks everybody for being here. If it's your first time on a Wednesday meeting, welcome to our newcomers out there. If you've been here many times, you kind of know how this rolls. The big thing I will say is that don't be afraid to speak up. Matt's going to monitor in case anybody wants to raise their hand, but more often than not, you just jump in, say, Colin, shut up, I have a question. That works just as well. I thought about pivoting to talk about buy downs, which we discussed at length at the end of yesterday's team meeting. And what we're going to do is actually dovetail next Tuesday's team meeting and the mortgage portion of it into a discussion about interest rate buy downs. So I know you always have team meetings circled on your calendars, but next Tuesday will be valuable in terms of a 1-2 punch where we will discuss interest rate buy downs at length. But today we're going to breeze through top 20 questions that home buyers wish they would have asked. I've had the pleasure of helping hundreds, maybe 1,000 now, first-time buyers and second-time buyers, move-up buyers, downsizers, make their dream of home ownership come true. So I want to take you through this process of questions that you might get out in the field in terms of things that sometimes relate to mortgage and sometimes relate to real estate. So here we go. One of the most common questions, we'll start real simplistically, is what is a mortgage? In fact, there's a great Instagram account that some of you may follow with a friend of mine in California named Jen, who has the Instagram account is called What's a Mortgage? And he has some great content on there. But we know that anytime we get a loan, we sign a note that promises to pay back the lender in a certain term. All right. But we also sign a mortgage. The mortgage is the physical document that pledges the house as collateral or security for that loan. Most common one here, we talked about in the conversion meeting yesterday. Have you explored your financing options? Sounds a little bit better than are you pre-approved or not? It's a big question when we talk about financing options because a lot of that depends on your personal financial circumstances for the property you purchase. For instance, a lot of you know there are a lot of great first-time home buyer benefits out there. Some have lower down payments. Some allow sellers to contribute to your closing costs. Some have income restrictions. Those are typically what you're going to see in the conventional stream for first-time buyers. A VA loan, strictly used by a veteran. You have veteran status, whether that be active duty in any of the 6 branches of the military, or if you have a certain amount of service in the National Guard, you'd be eligible for a VA loan. But again, that's going to depend on your military background. And VA loans, of course, have the benefits of 0% down with no PMI on the loan. Quick segue. I had a client that called me a couple of days ago, and they were talking about a VA loan that they were going to buy, and they wanted their brother and their brother's friend to be on the loan. VA is the only type of loan that cares about who else is the co-borrower. All right. So if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend in a VA situation and the non-military spouse is not a veteran, becomes a lot stickier because they are not technically married, right? VA is the only type of loan that cares about marital status. So this particular borrower called me and said, I'm thinking about going conventional. I'm buying a $450,000 property. And I told him, hey, look, you realize that if you add these other couple folks to the loan, the lender is going to take the lowest of the credit scores, right? So you may have good credit and your brother may have good credit, but you don't want to do conventional. And by the way, you're going to have to do conventional 5% down because the three incomes that we have here are going to be exceeding the income limit for 3% down conventional. So whenever possible, if you have the VA benefit, use that VA benefit. You've got other traditional options, FHA, USDA, which are for properties in declared rural areas. Matt is on the call from Flex. Matt did a great USDA training that's available on the YouTube channel if you want to check out USDA. And then new construction, of course, that can be bought with any number of these loans. So the big thing is that when you work with Flex, you want to make sure that you talk through what loan is best for the reason that you're looking to buy a property. Okay, so you want to make sure that you talk with a lender that understands all of the different options that are available to you, not just here you go, here's your pre-approval. Well, hang on a minute. Like, am I going FHA? If so, what does that mean? What are the advantages to FHA? What are the pitfalls to FHA, right? Would I qualify for a conventional loan? I have military service, but I've never used my VA benefit before. You want to talk through all those different scenarios with a lender. Next slide. What steps do I need to take to secure a loan? You know, in this competitive real estate environment, this is an important question, right? Nobody wants to be disappointed. They go out, they look at properties, and then they find out later, oh gosh, I know we wanted to make an offer on that property, but we don't qualify, right? You don't want to put the cart before the horse, right? Insert your own Wells Fargo joke there, right? Cart, horse, you guys get it. But securing your financing first through a pre-approval is going to give you the security you need to confidently shop for a home. And of course, helps you, the agent, negotiate a contract on your behalf. What does a loan application look like? Typically, it's going to be a run through of your current address, your current employment situation, your social security number, your date of birth, your last 2 years of address history, your last 2 years of employment history, and then most frequently, for example, in our case, a borrower will complete a loan application, and then the loan application will say, oh, I see you're self-employed, I need your tax returns. Or if you're not self-employed, I don't need your tax returns. I see that you're getting spousal maintenance, alimony, child support. You know, we need a divorce decree to corroborate that. So the most common things are photo ID, most recent pay stub, W-2 from the most previous year, and then bank statements for assets. Those are kind of the big four that we talk about with applications and pre-approvals. Any questions about loan applications, some strange things that you or your borrowers may have seen along the way? Cool. So when the house hunting process starts, maybe you've heard these two different phrases before, a pre-qualification or a pre-approval, right? And there's a big difference between the two. A pre-qual letter is basically an informal discussion about your income, assets, and credit, right? It doesn't obligate you to anything. It doesn't require any paperwork. It just says, yeah, you know, based on our discussion, you should be able to qualify for $340,000, 5% down. There's no verification of assets, you know, it's all stated. So a pre-qualification doesn't really go a whole heck of a long way, right? A better option is going to be an actual pre-approval, right? Which is a commitment from the lender. A pre-approval process collects the information for your app, the documentation required, like I just mentioned, W-2s, pay stubs, bank statements. And then also, most frequently, this is sent through underwriting, which is a preliminary authorization to approve your credit file. So a pre-approval is a lot deeper than a pre-qual, as you can tell. It can also give you an advantage when negotiating with the seller because there's nothing worse than submitting a really solid offer with just a pre-qual letter, right? A pre-qual letter isn't really worth the paper that it's printed on. A pre-approval gives the lender the ability to call the listing agent on the buyer's behalf, on your behalf as the buyer's agent, and say, guess what? Yeah, I have W-2s, I have pay stubs. We've pulled credit. I have assets. The big bottom line here is pre-approvals are significantly better and carry significantly more weight than a pre-qual. Any questions? All right, so we did a Wednesday training a couple weeks ago on credit scores, but there's a lot of talk about credit scores. And if you weren't on this call, then this will be a good introduction. If you were, this will be a good refresher, right? So credit scores are simply a numerical representation based on your credit history. Now, it's based on some algorithms that typically are closely guarded by FICO. So we don't really know how that number is calculated, but we know lenders will use these scores to determine the risk of your loan. Typically, what happens is you submit a loan application, we're going to pull credit, and there are going to be 3 scores, 1 score from each of the credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. The lender is going to use the middle of those scores. So if it's 700, 720, and 740, 720 is going to be the score that's used. All right. If it's you and a co-borrower, like I just mentioned in that VA example, lenders are going to take the lower of the 2 borrowers' middle scores. So let's say that you have a wife that has really good credit, 760 is her middle score, but the husband has scores of 640, 660, and 680. That loan is based off the husband's score of 660. Now, sometimes if you have a savvy mortgage broker, for example, many times in my career, I've said, hey, look, you qualify just on wife's income. So both of you can go into title, both of you can be on the purchase agreement, but let's utilize just wife on the loan because that's going to give us access to the best rates and costs. So you can do that in some instances where you have a big disparity between the 2 borrowers' credit scores. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about what's kind of the dividing line between an FHA loan, which is typically for more marginal credit borrowers, and conventional loans. And that number is 680. So typically anything that's below 680 will go FHA. Anything above 680 will go conventional. And that's with minimal down, right? If you're 20% down and you have a 640 credit score, you're going to want to go conventional. You don't want to pay PMI at 20% down. But typically, if you've got a first-time buyer that has a minimal amount of down payment, if you're below 680, they're going to go FHA. If they're above 680, they're going to go conventional. Okay. So because interest rates are really a reflection of risk, those with higher credit scores tend to get lower rates. Those with higher credit scores tend to get lower rates than those with lower credit scores that tend to get higher rates. All right. Questions on credit scores in general and some of the kind of basic strategies that I just outlined.
This isn't a question, but it's personal experience. When I bought my current home, we were on the border of being good, like a good conventional buyer versus being an FHA buyer. And my house had been on the market for a while. So we chose to go FHA because it kept our payment lower. But that's something that I would encourage you to talk to your clients about, especially when it's a market like we're seeing today where it's cooled down a little bit and there's absolutely opportunity to get an FHA offer accepted. If it makes sense for them payment wise, it might be the best option for them. That's just kind of like my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I'll totally chime in. We actually did that too on our house. So, you know, I think a lot of times there's this, I don't know, preconceived notion, right? That FHA is like horrible. Oh my God, it worked out completely to our benefit. We got a great property at a great rate. I mean, even in lieu of having a little bit of PMI, there's just not even a reason. It hands down was for us the better option. So, you know, and that was in the height of a crazy market. So now, yeah, I 100% agree. Was that Crystal?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
Also, in addition to that, in terms of PMI, I refinanced after we bought the house when I had enough equity. I had over 10% equity at that time, and I got a lower rate, but the result, I stayed as an FHA loan. And even though I did that, when I had that much equity and refinanced, I moved into the bracket of FHA loans where my PMI will actually drop off after 10 years, I believe was the timeline. So lifelong PMI on FHA isn't always the case. It depends on how much equity you're going to have.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's great insight, Crystal and Jen, is we are now moving very much into an FHA market. And I think that, quite frankly, you have some agents out there that have maybe never written an FHA offer. They've never presented to their sellers an FHA offer. And FHA is really a pretty darn good product. I mean, I think that you have agents that perhaps do not understand appraisal guidelines that are a little bit different, but most often you're going to get chipping and peeling paint, that's called. And, you know, FHA also has a bigger qualifying range, right? So where traditionally you're going to have conventional loans that are capped at 50%, you know, FHA loans, they typically go to 55, 56, 57% of the gross income on that total housing ratio. So it gives you a little more leeway. And Crystal, you're right. 11 years, you were close. So 11 years, if you have 10% down on an FHA loan, whether it be a purchase where you have 10% down up front, or if you do an FHA streamline refinance, which you referenced, with that 10% down, it's not life of loan. It will go away after 11 years.
And I think a
Something
lot
else-
of times people think that they're constrained to like only what the limit of the FHA is. So at the time, our limit was, you know, at the time FHA was only going to like, I think it was like 390 or something. We still were able to purchase, you know, a higher than that home, pay the difference, and have a great property. So I sometimes you got to think outside the box, and that's with a well, with a septic, all kinds of things were negotiated in it to make it work to our benefit. And that was in the height of a crazy market where people weren't asking for those things. At the end of the day, you never know unless you actually ask. And that people would have never thought we would have gotten it under list price with a brand new septic and deal with well issues. So they're easy things to navigate through. Don't be afraid to ask the question. The worst thing they're going to do is say no.
Yeah.
Types of financing is a really lengthy part of my buyer consult. So I always talk through like 6 items in the purchase agreement, and financing is one. I'll go, okay, you're going to use this type of financing. I deal with a lot of VA buyers. And then I go, but let's talk about the hierarchy of the types of financing in the eyes of a seller. And I go through cash, conventional, and then government loans. And I do that to teach them in advance that because we're going to be using an FHA or a VA or whatever, USDA, that we're going to be at a bit of a disadvantage right off the bat, and you're going to have to write a stronger offer and give the seller more things if you want to compete against a conventional buyer in a multiple offer situation. It's been a really great line of conversation in my buyer consults, and I think it's helped me avoid issues down the line with offer writing. Just another little 2 cents. Now I'll shut up and you can continue, Colin.
No, you're good. I think this is all good feedback. I like when it's not me just talking at the screen. And I'll add one tidbit, right? Which, I mean, Jen, use you as an example, right? I only know this because you bragged about it yesterday, but you know, you're at 2.75% on your FHA loan, I think you said, right? And so, you know, somebody might approach you and be like, well, you know, you've got a lot of equity in that property. You should refinance out of that life of loan PMI, right? Well, why would you want to do that? Right? I mean, you know, your rate's going to go up 2.5%. You would definitely not want to do that. But flip the script on it. People that are buying FHA now at 5.5%, it sets the table for, guess what? This FHA loan is a vehicle to get you into this home that we anticipate is going to continue to grow in value. Okay. You can pay the principal down. You can work on your credit. You having the mortgage and paying the mortgage on time is going to increase your credit if credit's an issue, which typically it is FHA, right? You know, and then when rates come back down, boom, here's what you can do. You can refinance that 5.5% loan into conventional. You know, maybe you've accrued enough equity in the property where you can dump the PMI altogether. So you're going to lower your rate. You're going to dump the life of loan PMI, right? Jen, it doesn't really work for your scenario, you know, buying at such a low interest rate, right? But it does absolutely work from a strategy now. You follow me?
No, but and totally being vulnerable here, just that tidbit of advice you gave me a couple of weeks ago about, you know, where I was at with my equity and stuff. So was chit-chatting with Colin about life, right? And as things were slower over the summer and stuff, you know, I was putting more on my credit card, which, you know, we spent so much time after we bought the house, right? Clearly we were FHA because the credit score was a little lower, life, relocation, all that good stuff, job loss, all that. Well, buying the house had increased our credit. I mean, it was an insane amount, like almost, I think 75, 100 points. I mean, our credit's been great, right? But then things have been slower. We've been putting things on credit again, and I can't stand seeing that number. So Colin mentioned to me, like, well, what about a home equity loan? And you were dead on, Colin, on that, as far as, so we did take a look, and we actually are utilizing that option because we have such a good amount of equity so quick because I got it under list price. So instead, we opted to get the home equity loan now. It's not a big amount. It's only given us like a $250 a month payment. We're now going to be paying off all the credit. Our credit will continue to go back up and get back where it was, you know, 6 months ago. And we still have equity to leverage and we don't have to utilize it. Now we're paying a lesser percentage on that than we would be on our credit cards. So, I mean, that I wouldn't have had that information if I hadn't been a little bit vulnerable and shared that information with you. But I kind of knew that, like, you would know what was the best route for me to go with that, you know? So it's continuing to work in our favor. So don't be afraid to ask the questions because you don't know. Anybody that says their life is perfect is a liar. So, you know, and I think this information is good to have in these real life personal experiences for me. I do not hesitate to share them with my buyers because it allows them to realize that I am a real human being that has gone through the same struggles and seen success from it. But you have to ask the questions.
That's all great, Jen. And I mean, I think that, people are struggling in this economy, right? I mean, I think that, you know, I talked with a guy yesterday and, you know, he said, I want to downsize. I want to move out to the country. And, you know, if we continue to spend on credit cards like we're spending on credit cards, we're going to lose this house. And I said, whoa, you've got $140,000 worth of equity. You know, now your plan might be sell and then, you know, put that toward that credit card debt, pay that off for sure. But he's like, I just don't want to do, you know, I don't want to do a cash out refi or, you know, whatever it might be. And I'm like, time out. Like, you know, well, another lender told me about a cash out refi. And I'm like, you're under 3%. Like, don't ever touch that loan ever. You know, I mean, you've got a ton of equity, utilize a home equity line of credit. And, you know, they're not as cheap as they were, right? And the rate does get variable, but if the thought is, okay, I can take a home equity line of credit and it might be 8%, okay? But if I can use that to take care of credit cards that are 24.99%, then I've accomplished something, right? So
That's exactly what we did. And
yeah,
I mean, it's going to, it takes a crap ton of weight off the shoulders. And then when you have that weight lifted, I just, even as far as business, I can breathe again and go, okay, let's go. It's game time. So when you just have to search for the answers, and you were spot on, dead on with that one. So thank you.
you are welcome. And I mean, that's kind of what we're all about here is, finding solutions, right? I mean, we didn't make a nickel off that, Jen, but that's okay. That makes me feel great. It made me feel great yesterday to advise somebody on, hey, what about this particular option? So we're all about being a sounding board for these sorts of issues. This is a good segue here to slide number 7. All right. So, how do you select the best loan program? We've been talking about this a little bit, right? So, how do you expect your finances to change over the next few years, right? I mean, I've had recent graduates who bought their first home, yet they're in a field where they expect significant pay increases once they get through residency, for example, if they're, out of med school or currently in med school or whatever it might be, or, they're in an apprenticeship phase of their career, right? Or maybe they're a new agent that's going to absolutely kill it, but it might take a couple of years, right? This is probably going to affect how long they plan to stay in the home. It's usually the most important question that I ask, okay? Because I'm going to get back to that idea about what Crystal and Jen brought up with FHA, right? If you're paying PMI and you're only going to live here for 3 or 5 years, right? Well, then maybe it doesn't really matter that much, right? What the PMI is, right? The other thing is when we talk about points, and so often we talk about, Rocket Mortgage, I pick on them, but, for many, many years now, you go to their website, Rocket is saying, hey, we've got a super low rate and you're going to pay 2 points, not the seller, not a temporary buy down, but you as the borrower are going to pay 2 points to lower the rate down to, 5.99%. Well, I've got a question, what happens when somebody turns around and refinances that property next year? Those points have gone out the window, right? Or what happens if somebody's going to move in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? It probably doesn't behoove them a whole lot to buy the rate down a bunch because they won't live in the property long enough for them to take advantage of that interest rate buy down. So how long you're going to live in the property is extraordinarily important, right? And then, oh, by the way, okay, you're only going to live there for 3, 4, 5 years. Are you going to sell at that point? Or, would this be a suitable investment property for you to hold on to? Okay. What about a changing mortgage payment amount, right? You've got somebody that's decided that they're going to buy as opposed to rent because they don't want their housing payment to go up every year, right? Some people aren't necessarily as concerned about that. Maybe they want an adjustable rate or they're interested in an adjustable rate. Right? Not a huge adjustable rate fan, but some people enjoy them, right? And then when do you want to be mortgage debt free, or do you want to leverage debt to buy other properties, right? Those are important conversations. I think that we've got a lot of generations that think differently on that, right? I mean, my parents are super thrilled to have, property that's totally paid off. I don't owe anybody anything. You talk to Parker, and he's like, I want to leverage as much debt as I can because I want to buy assets with that. Right. And that's a very Robert Kiyosaki way of looking at it. So getting a feel for how the client approaches debt, I think is really important as well in terms of choosing the best loan program. Questions?
Are you done, Colin?
Am I done?
Well, yeah, is that the end of your slide?
This slide, yes.
Okay, so I don't know if this is the right place to ask this, but how about assumable mortgages? Like I see we might I think we might be seeing that more going forward. Like Jen and everything she shared, she would be a prime example of an FHA assumable mortgage. If she were to go sell her house, that would be a benefit to both her and the buyer because she has such a low rate and rates have taken a hike. Can you touch a little bit on that? Because I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of that going forward. And a lot of agents don't even know what it means. So in our MLS, it will state if the mortgage is assumable or not. And I think a lot of agents ignorantly just check no because they don't know enough about it, where in fact that mortgage may be assumable and could have benefits to both parties.
Do they have to pay it like, let's say if I were to move in 5 years and we still owed 150,000, they have to pay the difference that's owed though, right? On the assumable mortgage?
That's the biggest sticking point. And it's a great question, Cassie, because it is something that we're seeing more. Assumable loans are a function of real estate transactions where you take over someone else's loan. Okay, so I would say, hey, Jen, I like your house. I like your 2.75% rate. I want to assume your mortgage. Okay. Only available on FHA and VA loans. So conventional is not assumable, right? And Jen, you're right. The sticking point becomes that, okay, Colin, that sounds great. We owe 400 on it. And I want to sell it to you for 500. Okay. Well, the issue is that then Colin as the buyer says, all right, I'm going to assume your mortgage, but I have to come up with the difference between the current mortgage balance and then what the actual purchase price is. So 100 grand in that scenario, right? With VA, there's another wrinkle in that the veteran's entitlement stays tied up in the property. Okay. So veterans have a certain amount of entitlement that they can use for a 0% down, fully guaranteed VA loan, right? So if I buy a property for $400,000, a $400,000 VA loan, that means that $100,000 of my entitlement is now tied up in the property. So if somebody assumes a veteran's loan, then, I go to buy another property and they say, hey, you only have a certain amount of entitlement left. Well, no. They assumed my VA loan. They bought my property from me. Doesn't matter. That veteran's entitlement is still tied up in that old loan, right? So that's just a wrinkle on VA. But in both cases, the most sticky part becomes, all right, when did you buy the property? 2019. Well, it's appreciated 30% in value. If I'm coming to you and saying, I want to assume your loan, if I start doing the math, might make more sense for me just to go 20% down conventional because I'm going to need to bring 100 grand to the table anyway if I want to assume this. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, and I actually didn't even know that piece. So that's really beneficial. It could be then good for people who have a lot of money to put down and get a good rate on what's left on the balance of, in Jen's case, let's say your house is appreciated 100 grand. If someone had that, it might be a good option. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Great question.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
I almost had one recently, Cassie, where it was not a lot. Like it was a VA one that we were considering assuming for a buyer. And it was, I think it was like $50,000, which obviously not everybody has that. But for the person that did have it, it was like a low rate. It was like a 2.5 rate. So that $50,000 now would have saved them tons over the course of their loan.
Right. Over the course of 30 years and a 6 to 7% interest rate versus the 2.75.
Yeah. Hey, Colin,
And
real
they
quick,
pay-
when you
Go ahead.
go ahead. Well, when you purchase, you can answer after her question because it might be off tracking. But if somebody were to keep that original home as an investment property, when you purchase a second, like the one we just recently did, where it was their second property and it was investment property, so there was 20 or 25% that he had to put down. If you turn that original property into the investment property and then purchase a new residential property for yourself, do you then have to put down 15 to, whatever the higher amount, like you do if you were purchasing a second home as the investment property?
Oh, no,
Okay.
no. So let's say that you own a $280,000 house in Seward, right? Or Rosemount, or, Savage, right? Single family, 1,800 square feet, 2 bed, 2 bath, right? And you are moving up and you want to keep this property because you think that you have a good interest rate, it'll cash flow. I want to dip my toe in invest. No, you can do 5% down conventional, for example. The issue you might run into is that you can't have two FHA loans within 100 miles of each other. Okay. So if you've got an FHA loan and then you try and buy, a new property FHA, you're going to be in some trouble, right? But if you have a conventional loan, you can have multiple conventional loans and they don't have to be, it's not like they come to you and say, now where you get into issues is where you go the opposite direction and you say, hey, I have a $600,000 property and I'm going to go buy this $280,000 property and only put 5% down. Occupancy fraud. Like, why are you downsizing? You got to have a really good reason because it looks like you're just buying what's going to be an investment property with not the full 20% down. But if you're moving up in price, it's done all the time and you can go 5% down, no problem.
Okay, I think Crystal was trying to ask a question. Crystal, was that you?
Sorry,
She
I'm
was,
dealing,
I
with,
was.
I'm dealing with dogs. I'm trying to be quiet. Okay, so what I was going to say is with an assumable mortgage, are you required to bring that in cash or could you do like a second mortgage to cover that equity that has been gained or the appreciation of the property that has been gained since the original purchase?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think part of that would be difficult because even if you took out a second, you wouldn't cover the full, right? Because even a second still requires there to be 20% equity position in there, doesn't it? Like even when you take out a second or a line of credit, you can't max out to value.
Correct.
know.
I mean, you would likely need to be in a 10% equity position. In other words, if you think about it from the structure of 80-10-10, right? 80-10-10s were a big thing maybe 6-7 years ago where you had an 80% first, a 10% second, and 10% cash down payment. The thing that I think might be challenging there is with assumable loans, the lender has to approve it, the current lender, right? So they have to say, oh yeah, we're okay with that, right? And so then the lender would have to approve a subordination agreement. The borrower has to qualify, okay, what are they doing here? And then you have to have a HELOC lender that would be able to, to go to say 90% loan to value if that's what's required. But it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure the answer to that.
Can you guys hear me? I am on a new phone, so this is Jelena. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Jelena, what's up?
Hi. So I actually ran into this for the first time in July with clients of mine who were buying a duplex, and it was an assumable loan, and we looked into it. And yes, you can finance that remaining portion as a second. It's just the interest rates are typically so much higher on that. It offsets any value in assuming the FHA loan to begin with. And that's why my clients opted not to do it. For the portion of the second that they would, the second mortgage that they would be getting, they did have to have at least 10% down. And the interest rates were already at that time, like in the sixes and maybe even sevens they got quoted. So in the long run, it made more sense for them to do 5% conventional themselves than to assume the FHA, which was in the high twos, and go ahead and do the second for the remaining portion. So you can do it. I learned that this summer just by experience, but it doesn't always make the numbers work out if you're paying a higher interest rate or they have to come up with a higher down payment that they don't have. So just wanted to share.
Wow, what a bummer. Like this whole assumable conversation. And we've talked about it a few times during this kind of shift in interest rates to kind of hear that it's like not really even an option for most people is kind of sad. Anyway.
It's not as easy as they make it sound, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they make it sound like, oh, you can just get this rate. No. And that's what's hard, because you have to be like, oh yeah, by the way, you can get this.
I
But
think the exception to that is the value of the home. So if
True.
you have somebody who's only been there for a year and they don't have some crazy amount of equity in the house, and you can cover that difference at 5%, then maybe it's worth it if the interest rate is low enough. I don't see any value if it's, you know, $50,000, $100,000 in equity that you have to come up with or finance in a second mortgage. But if the value of the home is there, then it's worth it.
Or
Yeah,
if
the
market
ideal
were to
home
complete
is-
a complete tank like it did 2008, 2009, it could be very beneficial in that circumstance as well for a seller to get out from under it.
I totally agree on all fronts. I mean, I think that, this works well when properties aren't appreciating at double digits. And I mean,
Well, I was just saying, we also completely derailed you, so you can totally feel
Oh,
free
no,
to
no,
pick up
you're
where you
good.
left off, but I think this was good information.
I was thinking, I remember going to some kind of networking event in maybe 2015. And there was a guy who had this company that's on the screen now called Take List. And he was just pitching assumable mortgages. And, I was like, that is a great idea. And, he's had to wait 7 years for this to actually be a thing. But, I think it's great that the conversation's gone this way because, this is real life stuff that's going on. And Jillian, I just wanted to circle back to you. So the CLTV, combined loan to value, was capped at 90%. Is that right? So it would have been a 10% cash investment?
It was, yes, I guess overall that's what it looked like. And my buyers wanted to do 5% down, and it's a duplex. They were going to live in the property. So I don't think they had the cash to go the full 10%, but it was only 10% on the amount that they would need to get a second mortgage on. I don't think it was 10% over. I mean, I guess I don't know enough about your role in it to know what that is, but 10% just on the amount that they would need to finance, which was roughly, I want to say it was right around a little over $100,000.
Interesting.
But again, for my clients, it came down to what the interest rate on the second was, in addition to the combined added amount they would need for down payment, which offset any savings of doing the assumable loan to begin with. So they just said for the, it makes sense when they just do 5% and lock it. So.
Yeah. And what was the purchase price? Ballpark?
340.
340. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that, my brain goes to the smaller the purchase price, the less of a significant gap. Granted, you might be dealing with a different kind of buyer from a financial perspective, but, I mean, if you have, maybe it's only 20 grand, that's the differential, the difference between where HELOC rates were, HELOC second mortgage, where those rates were now versus then, I mean, it's still real, but obviously, if you're at 8%, let's say, on a second mortgage to make up that difference on 20 grand, it's less painful than 100 grand. So, properties that are a little bit lower in value, that have less of a gap to make up, it could be a legitimate way to do it. And last thing, I'll close the book on assumables, cheaper costs. Right? I mean, you don't originate a new mortgage, right? So you don't have discount points. You probably, I mean, appraisal maybe, right? But, basically the lender says, hey, $1,000 and we'll take care of all the paperwork for you. All right. I don't think we're going to make it through 20, guys. So I'll stop at 10 here. But this has been a really good discussion, and I appreciate, this is a lot more fun when we have a a hive mind that's working together versus me. Let's see. Where am I even? Let's see. So we talked about renovation, new construction. That's certainly on the table here. Locking in a rate. Let's talk about locking in a rate. So, you know, when you decide on a property, you execute a contract, then the buyer has to consider whether or not they lock in the rate to guarantee the interest rate that's on the table is actually the interest rate at closing. Now, people think, and this is a great day to have this training because, as I mentioned in the team meeting yesterday, the Fed is going to move rates by 3/4 of a point today. That's the Fed funds rate. Okay. That is not directly correlated to mortgage rates. All right. The mortgage market is actually the second biggest traded market in the world behind Forex. So mortgage prices will change every day. In this kind of market, hour by hour, right? So I talked about how just because the Fed's going to move 3/4 of a point today, you know, mortgage rates are pretty flat today. Everybody knows it's coming, right? It moves more in conjunction with the 10-year Treasury note, which, without getting into a bunch of economics, the reality that you need to know from a buyer's agent perspective is rates are changing every day. And in this kind of market where we've seen rates continue to go up, you should definitely lock as opposed to float. I mean, I think that there's not a whole lot of upside in waiting to lock the rate. We've seen that a little bit recently. You know, we're not supposed to technically advise people to lock or float. But, you know, I will say that one feels a lot worse than the other. What do I mean by that? If you don't lock and rates go from 6 to 7, you'll remember it forever, especially if it's your first house. And oh, by the way, especially if you don't qualify at 7%. You know, if you float, you might pick up a 1/4 point, but I mean, the risk is so significant, especially if you're at the top end of your qualifying range. So one more, we'll talk about discount points. We talked about this a little bit, and then I'll wrap it up. We'll have a few more questions. So discount points, Alexa asked a great question about this to me this week. This is where you will buy the rate down. 1 point is 1% of the loan amount. So you've got a $350,000 loan. You want to buy the rate down from, say, 6% to 5.625, and it's going to cost you $3,500 or 1 point in order to buy that rate down by 3/8 of a point. And then, like I said previously, any good LO, lender, broker, whatever, should do a math game. How long are you going to stay there? Okay, you're going to stay there a while. Okay, that's good. Then you probably should think about buying points. All right, I understand that logic, right? How much is this going to save you monthly? You're saving 3/8 of a point on a $350,000 loan. That's going to save you about $80 a month. Okay, so then it's just, all right, let's do some math here. $3,500 up front. You're going to save $80 a month. It's going to take you about 44 months to break even on that upfront money. Okay, so the amount of money that you pay at closing, assuming the seller's not covering it, things like that, that's money coming out of your pocket, right? You would have to live there for this amount of time to make it worthwhile. Okay, really simple math. You know, a buyer or seller can pay discount points. If you negotiate a seller credit, that credit can be applied to buying down the rate. Crystal loves to do that. Crystal, especially on VA loans, let's get the max, baby. Let's get 4% in seller pays, and anything that's left over, we're just going to lower that rate, which is great. Use every dollar that we can. There's nothing worse than going to a closing and leaving money on the table from seller contributions because you don't take it with you. You can also go with the market rate. It has no credit, doesn't require any points, right? I'm not going to spend $3,500. I'm going to go with, you know, I'm not going to pay points. Just give me 6%. Okay, cool. That allows you some flexibility where if you want to refinance down the road, you're not stuck with these sunk costs. You know, if in 18 months you want to refinance, you're not saying, oh, paid $3,500 in points. Now I'm refinancing. That money's just going out the window. I'm going to leave it there. I mean, we've gone 53 minutes, but this has been great, gang. Any questions on any of this material or anything that we discussed before we go?
I have one additional question for you, Colin. Yesterday at the team meeting, you had said, what was it? A 20% conventional loan could get up to 9% in seller pays. I have never heard of that. I thought it was a 3%. Is there a different amount if it's applying seller concessions towards buying down a rate than
It
it is
does.
just covering closing costs?
Yep. And I was wrong, but that's okay. 25%. If you can, everybody see this screen here? Parker actually asked me for this about 10 minutes before the call. It's actually 25% or more that 9% is allowable. So I was off by 5%. But I'm going to, hey, Matt, you're on this call, right? Still?
Yep.
You got names?
Yes.
Okay. So everybody that's on this call, I'm gonna shoot an email out. I'm going to attach this. This is a good reference chart. FHA, VA, USDA, really easy. FHA 6%, VA 4%, USDA 6%. But conventional loans, to your question, Jelena, if you're less than 10% down, conventional loan, 3% is the max. If you're 10 to 25% down, 6% is the max. If you exceed 25% down, 9% is the max.
So
That is
how
very
do we combat, I guess, the objection, right? If somebody's putting down 25% and then we're like, oh, hey, by the way, we have enough money to put 25% down, but by the way, can you pay 6% towards the closing costs? Anybody have a good, or is that not, I guess I've never asked for that much. I think 4 has ever been the max, but how do you have
Well,
that?
if you're looking at a house that's been on the market for a bit, you're the only offer. I mean, I ask for 4% as a starting point on nearly every VA loan I do, and I never get pushback. If I get pushback, it's about asking for closing costs at all. It's not necessarily about the dollar amount. And I also advise my clients in advance and say, hey, 4 is the max they allow me to ask for. I'm going to go ahead and ask for all of it. You're not going to need all of it. If we get it, we'll use it as a rate buy down. It'll be great for you. If we don't get it, it's not going to hurt you. So we might as well ask and see what they say. I mean, we all know that when we're writing offers and we're dealing with a listing agent, sometimes the response is sometimes the response is we need a net X dollars. So if you add that on top of that, you can get it. So I get that often. And I just do what they ask. And I tell my buyers, this is what they want. Do you want to do that? And they'll say yes, or we'll even go in low again and see if they'll take it. You know, it's a game.
Jen, I think your
Yeah,
point
agreed.
was, how do you combat the seller saying, why do you need 9% in closing costs when you have 25% down? And I would say that the argument of that would be, they want to put the 25% down as their down payment, right? Because we know if they're putting the 25% down and they're paying closing costs, you see what I'm saying? Some of that's going towards closing costs, etc. So that would be a way to combat that, is saying, well, they want that as their full down payment and don't want any of the closing costs out of their pocket. And I think to what Crystal pointed out is it's going to be probably more accepted on a home that's been sitting for a little while, not on one that's, VA is a whole different beast when it comes to that, because oftentimes they need it, period.
Yeah. And one thing I have been advising my clients, and when we are getting the seller, I had one last night that we asked for, but it's kind of hard when you have a bridge loan. She was like, well, clearly if they can afford both homes, right, they don't really need it. Well, you can't blame a girl for trying. But I've been advising, when we do get the seller pay closing costs, one big thing I think that's worth mentioning is that I strongly advise my clients, like, hey, please keep in mind that if for some reason we hit an appraisal issue, especially on VA or FHA, that if we hit an appraisal issue, the first thing to go is going to be the seller pay closing costs. So I always make sure that they do actually have that amount, and then that's a bonus, right? If we don't have to, but if we get into an appraisal issue and we have to renegotiate anything, the likelihood of, some or all of that closing costs that we won would probably be the first thing that's going to get put back on the table as a negotiation. So worthwhile thing to bring up to your buyers, like, hey, we want it now, but don't go spending it until we're closed.
Yeah, one thing on that too, Dylan just did a great job, got a VA loan, accepted with 3%. And he even said to the agent, because it was multiple offers, that, you know, if the appraisal does come in low, we'll take, you know, whatever the amount is, you know, whatever the appraisal comes in low at, we'll take that off the closing costs. We had that conversation with the buyers, and I think that helped them get that winning offer. So great point, Jen.
Yeah, I'm only having those conversations on the front end if I'm in multiple offers though, right? Like otherwise I'm giving the image of my buyers to the listing agent that they have nothing. Right? Like,
oh yeah,
you
no,
can think
I'm
they
giving
have
that
nothing
to the
until we have to have a
buyers.
different talk.
Yeah, I'm giving that image to the listing agent, but I'm reminding the buyers, because sometimes the buyers get excited. Oh, okay, great, I got this closing cost, right? And then they forget that, like, you know, there's still further negotiations. So I usually remind the buyers, like, don't go spending that money. Like, don't be planning on that money to put your fence in until we close. Because if we have to, that's the first thing coming off, you know, if we needed to.
I have a question too. I mean, Jen, to your initial question about who's taking 6% in seller pays in this market, like, all right, I'm making an offer on a $400,000 home and I want 6% in seller pays. Would you rather have me ask for 6% in seller pays, or should we just come in at 375? Right? And oh, by the way, the seller pays, you know, agent commissions based on the price, right? So,
well, and when you also, when, you know, they when you lower the seller pay, you know, the net, right, for the seller, ultimately, if the net's lower, they're now paying out, sometimes just twisting a little bit and getting them to think, well, now you're paying a little bit lower commission, you're paying a little less deed tax, you know, so sometimes twisting it. I've also found sometimes the agents on my particular house, agent didn't really read the contract real good. He was just so darn excited to finally have an offer on the house that he didn't realize some of the things we threw in. So sometimes there's agents who just aren't really looking at all of those parts and are missing a line or two. So never hurts
Hey
to
guys,
throw it in.
Sorry to interrupt, but like we've gone overtime and it looks like someone else is trying to sign in for probably a 1 o'clock meeting to the same Zoom account.
no,
So
tell them to wait.
I don't know who it is. I'm guessing it's Liz or Parker, but I just get notifications since I'm hosting. So perhaps we could just finish the second half for next week's mortgage.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm going to end that just so whomever needs this for the 1 o'clock, and I'm sorry to so abruptly interrupt, but we need to respect everybody's time as well. So
Thanks, everybody. This is great. Appreciate you all.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.